Elisa, thank you so much for joining us today on Time to Show Up. I've been really looking forward to this for quite some time.
Do you want to say big fans of your podcast?
And if you haven't listened to the podcast and you're watching now, this Jungian life is just a jewel, just an absolute jewel. So check it out.
Thank you.
But let's start talking about about you. If you were able to say something about yourself to someone who's never met you before, about who you are, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I guess, do you want the resume version?
However you want to play it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Jungian Analyst. I've been a Jungian Analyst for about 12 years. I graduated about 12 or 13 years ago. And I'm a psychotherapist, a licensed clinical social worker here in the United States, and an author. My second book is coming out in February, and I have a podcast, and those things are all kind of tied together and interrelated, actually.
And the book, I've got to ask you to plug the name of your book because it's a very interesting one.
So my first book was called Motherhood, Facing and Finding Yourself, and it was a book about how motherhood can be an opportunity for personal growth. My next book is called The Vital Spark, Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire. And it's published by Sounds True. You know, I'm really excited about it. I actually can't wait till the book is out in the world. It's about, well, and this is, you know, I guess all books are kind of autobiographical. So I'm sure we'll get into it. But it's really about women kind of leaning into their authority and agency. That is what the book is about.
I am very excited to read that.
I actually got Natalie for her birthday, the Women Who Run with the Wolves, and she's like, I've got that one already. it was a double down, but I think sort of some young based.
Yes.
Female fierceness, I think. Very
female fierceness.
Yes. Yeah.
Love
some
that
female
territory.
fierceness. Yeah. That's good. Good stuff.
Great.
Very good.
Okay, well, now that we've got the resume version, I'm going to go straight in with the more shrink-oriented questions.
Okay.
Well, a shrink-oriented question anyway. And you can meander and choose your opportunity here. But I wonder if you could tell us an important formative experience for you, a key moment that you think has really strongly shaped who you've become today. I know it's a big ask, and there's probably many to choose from. But
yeah, there are many to choose from, I suppose. You know, okay, how about this one? I didn't know I was going to say this, but I think I'll say this. At some point, I asked my mother, you know, how did people, you know, how were people created? Where did people come from? Or something, you know, where does all this come from? You know, I was probably like 3 or 4 or something. And my mother said, well, God made people. And then I said, who made God? And she said, people made God. And I think I do actually remember the conversation, but I also remember talking about it with my mother later. And what I love about her answer is she was okay with letting there be paradox. And somehow as a 4-year-old or whatever, I knew that was, you know, it didn't really answer the question, and yet it somehow did. Like it's somehow in my child brain, even I got that this was an unanswerable question and could only be answered with a paradox.
Wow.
And I think that my mother kind of continually modeled that for me in a way that wasn't even conscious. It's just kind of who she was. And it really shaped, I think, who I became, is that kind of way of engaging with the world.
So would you say that thread to who you are now? I mean, for me, it obviously speaks about the paradoxes that people sit with as analysts. But is that link a kind of an openness to paradox, would you say?
Well, an openness to paradox, but also because I think you need to have an openness to paradox to kind of question more deeply. The thing is, my mother, those are the kinds of questions that kids asked, right? And parents could just provide very pat answers to that, and that would sort of shut it down. But in a way, by giving me a paradox, it was an invitation to keep thinking about it. And sort of that, maybe the most important thing there was to think about it rather than to come up with an answer. So, maybe what I'm saying is, I think my mother, in a very, again, not purposeful way, encouraged me to develop a symbolic, or even, dare I say, a kind of a spiritual attitude. And
so
I
as
think
part
that,
of that, then it's kind of. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that
Please.
I think that I didn't decide to become a therapist. I decided to become a Jungian analyst, and I would never have decided to become a therapist. I was only interested in becoming a Jungian analyst. So I think that the thing about being a Jungian analyst rather than a therapist, and I do love being a therapist now, but the Jungian part about it is really about psycho-spiritual meaning. And I think I was primed through my relationship with my mother to have a comfortable relationship with that part of life.
I love that. That's so exciting. Just the possibility that you could be offered an opening into that at such a young age, which invited greater questioning, approach, curiosity, discovery, is extraordinary. And I think quite, at least from people I know, quite exceptional. So what's been one of the most surprising or unexpected things about your life course to date?
Well, I guess one of the things maybe that was a surprise is, I'm a pretty agreeable person. I think that tracks with being a therapist. It's like you like people, you want people to like you. Most therapists are not really strong in the kind of confrontation department. And I really hate confrontation. I've gotten better at it, and I still just hate it. It just like sits in my body when I have to do it, and I just, at least now I can do it. I used to just avoid it, but that's an important skill in life. It's an important skill as an analyst. Sometimes you have to confront people. It's still kind of not my strong suit. But the interesting thing is that a number of years ago, I became concerned about what I saw happening in the treatment of young people with gender dysphoria. And I did more research, and I took a lot of time kind of going in that direction. And I felt so strongly that what I was seeing was ethically questionable, that I felt like I had to just begin to kind of speak about it. So I did some writing about it. I've written a couple of peer-reviewed articles about it. And there is no, if you hate confrontation, there is no worse place to put yourself. And so I sometimes still look at that and I'm like, how did I wind up there? So that surprises me. And I didn't see that coming. I wasn't looking for an opportunity to get in the middle of some big conflict. But it just happened, and here we are.
So would you say that the surprising thing was the reaction that you weren't expecting, or that the surprising thing is that you found yourself kind of in that you maybe you did know that it would provoke that kind of that reaction?
Oh no, I knew, I knew
you
that it was going to be.
The surprising thing is that you put yourself there anyway.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We may come back to that later. Let's see how we go. What do you think? And maybe this tracks actually, considering you were just talking about that, about agreeableness and confrontation. But and maybe your answer to this question will change since then. But what do you think are the main differences between how people perceive you and how you perceive yourself?
It is kind of related. I mean, I am always, well, so some of my close associates have kind of reflected back to me. For example, Joseph on the podcast, he once said to me, that I came across as, this incredibly confident, powerful, 100 tons of bricks, so I'm like, really? So I guess at least some people see me as formidable, which is not really how I experience myself. And I think, I have a friend that I think that that's probably true for her too, that she can, like any of us, she can feel insecure and unsure of herself at time, or a little bit bashful, but she comes across like a powerhouse. And I think that it can kind of get her in trouble, because just like I think it can kind of get me in trouble, because it's like, if you're not quite sure of how you're coming across, you're not quite sure of your own power in a way, then you don't understand the reaction that you might be provoking in other people. So I don't know that that's fixed for me, but yeah, I could use some work there.
Right. Well, yeah, because the gap between the self experience of maybe being quite vulnerable or agreeable and not a bulldozer, and being experienced as someone who can be, means that people treat you as the latter rather than the former, right? So you're extra exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that forms our kind of introductory session to get a taste of Lisa Marchiano, and the second part is kind of based on one of my favorite quotes, which comes from Hillel, which is, "I get up, I walk, I fall down, all the while I keep dancing." And we kind of know that's an aiming high quote. That's not the expectation is not that we really can necessarily keep dancing when we're walking and falling down, getting up, but kind of using that as an anchor point. Can you tell us about a time that you've fallen down and how you got up and carried on walking, and maybe whether or not there was dancing involved or not?
Bit of break dancing on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, maybe the story to tell is around the publication of my first book. So I was one of these people that, since I probably learned to read, I was like, some part of me was like, I'm going to write a book someday, and I've always like, I've had a couple of manuscripts of one kind or another throughout my life. So this was always really I would say kind of like a dream, a life dream, to be, to write a book. And it was one that really felt, like way over the moon. Like, maybe some people get to do that, but it would be really, it would be amazing if I could do that, but like not very likely that that's going to happen, But even though it felt like it was out of reach, it never went away. And then I had this idea when my kids were little. My son was like just a few months old, and my daughter was 2. This was really a hard time. And I was, it was like December, and it was bitter cold outside, and it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, but they'd both been up since like 4:30 or something ridiculous like that. And I was already exhausted, but it was only 8 o'clock. And I was like, how am I going to get through the day? So I put them in the stroller and just got out of the house, just to like get out of the house. And I'm pushing the stroller, and it's so cold, and the stroller's getting caught on tree limbs, and it's just, it's like the Baton Death March, and I just thought to myself, God, everything about being a mother is so hard. And then this voice came up and said, yes, but I'm growing a lot as a result. And I was in analytic training at that point. So of course, thinking a lot about Jung's ideas and the idea of individuation. And it grabbed me. I was like, this is individuation. This is an individuation opportunity, all of this. And I was like really excited by that thought. And I was like, okay, I've got to go read that book. So when the kids, went down for their nap later, I like got online and I was like looking for that book. And I was like, no one's written that book. So it's not like at the moment I said, I'm going to write that book. But I was like, well, this is a really interesting idea. And I'm curious about it for myself. And I'm curious about it for the women that I work with. And in analytic training, you have to write a thesis, which is, it's about like 120 pages or something. I was like, I'm going to write my thesis on that. So I sat with this idea, right? My son is, a few months old. My daughter's 2. I'm sitting with this idea. I'm thinking about it. I start reading kind of related books. I'm taking notes. It's just living with me. I write my thesis on it. That was a great experience. It was really well received. I'm like, I have more to say on this. I think I want to turn it into a book when I graduate. So as soon as I finished analytic training, I like how to write a nonfiction book proposal. And, I kind of sauntered off down that road. And, it was, as you might imagine, harder than I thought. So I started querying, and this one agent was kind enough to write back and say, look, this is a really interesting idea, but you don't have a really clear central idea here. And so, I'm going to pass. So I took that to heart. I knew that was good criticism, a good critique. And I kind of tabled my querying. And so at this point, this is probably like 2012. Okay, so the idea occurs to me in 2004. I write my thesis on it in 2011, 2010, something like that. This is now 2012, and I've decided to not query anymore because I need to go back to the drawing board. So at this point, my kids are like 10 and 8 or something like that. I'm like smack in the middle of like middle childhood. I'm homeschooling. There's chess, there's choir, there's all kinds of stuff. I have a practice. I'm building my practice. There's not a lot of time to work on the book. There's not a lot of space. It's like we're a family. My husband has a job. We have a house. We have kids. I have parents. My mom's ill at this point. It's not like there's lots of room to spend time doing something that pretty much has no chance of being economically remunerative, right? I mean, it's like this hobby that I have, right? To have this fantasy about publishing this book. And so it kind of languishes. I don't put it aside altogether. Ostensibly I'm still working on it, but I feel really stuck. I'm writing some. I'm also kind of getting a hold of the fact that you have to have a platform as a nonfiction writer. And this is like, I've never published anything. I don't have any social media presence at all. I don't even know how to relate to that world. I've never had any interest in that world. But I'm hearing that if I want to achieve this lifelong dream, I have to do this thing that I'm not interested in and is really daunting. And anyway, all of that. I mean, I'm not even on Facebook at this point. So, can you imagine not being on Facebook? So anyway,
no, I can.
So it kind of languishes, and occasionally I would sort of check in with myself and say, like, do I want to just let this go? Do I just want to let this go? And I would sit with that question. I'd sort of let that question drop and to see what would come back. And what would come back is, no, I don't want to let it drop. So I had this, I kind of felt, so this is the stumbling, right? Is that it's kind of going nowhere. I'm just going to be honest. It's not like there was anyone behind me going, God, you've got to do that, Lisa. You've got to do that. It's such a good, no one was doing that. My husband was like, could you please get to the dishes in the sink? I mean, there was just not a lot of impetus. The only energy behind it was coming from within. And, and there was nothing practical about it, but it just felt really important. So, I just said, okay, I've just got to really make a commitment to do this. And I kind of had a plan. My first choice was to get it published, as a trade book. My second choice was to get it published by one of the small publishing houses, like Inner City Books, that publishes books by Jungian Analysts, which would have, like, Inner City Books is like amazing. I would have been happy with that, but they don't tend to get very widely distributed. And I really wanted to write a book for mothers. I wanted the right people to read the book, and I'm not like a big, I'm going to change Jungian theory person. I'm just not that smart. I wanted to write a book. I felt like I had something to offer to mothers who were struggling with their role as mother, and that this could be real medicine for them. So it really felt kind of mission driven. But anyway, that was my second choice. And then the third choice was, well, I'll self-publish. I need to make a commitment to this project and just say, I'm going to get it out there, even if I just have to self-publish it. So, that was kind of the stumbling. And the dancing was just being able to listen in that this really mattered, and not give up on it.
That's really beautiful. So talking about motherhood as individuation, and individuation sort of bringing a different, perhaps a folkloric frame to it, is also potentially initiation. I think motherhood is one of the greatest initiations that a person can experience. Have there been times where you fell and you didn't think you would find your way back to your feet? And what happened if that was the case, if there were points in your life where that happened to you?
I mean, I would say that there were, I don't know that I ever thought I won't find my way back to my feet, but there were times of real suffering. I mean, I suppose all these things kind of, link together as a thread. When I was in my 20s, I was working in the field of international humanitarian assistance. And I thought that was, just the greatest thing ever. I was so excited. I thought I was so lucky to work in this field. And I thought it was my forever career. And then I moved. Had been working in DC. I moved to Manhattan to attend graduate school. I was getting a graduate degree in international and public affairs at Columbia. And that coincided with the end of an important relationship. So I thought this relationship was going to go the distance. I thought I had my whole life figured out. I thought I had my career, and I'm getting a graduate degree in that field, and I've got, this guy, and we're going to get married, and this is sort of it. And, the truth is that the move from DC had felt really disruptive. If I'm being honest with myself, I'd been having, I would say, career questions since even before. And then the relationship ended, and it was like I couldn't pretend like everything was in the place that it needed to be. And I want to say I got really depressed, but I'm stumbling over those words because I think that, what does that mean, right? When someone comes into our office and says, I'm depressed, like the first thing I say is, well, what do you mean? Well, I don't say it like that. I say, well, tell me, what is that like for you? Because it can mean 1,000 different things. And, there's the DSM criteria, and I certainly met some of them. But it really did feel like I want to say like a crisis of meaning or something. I mean, I didn't have this language at the time, but I was 28. And I forget the first person who said to me, oh, Saturn return. It's like, what? What's that? I didn't know anything about astrology. But the thinking that when you're 28, it's this kind of pivotal time. And now I see this again and again and again. I mean, I also think about it as, if you want to not refer to it in astrological terms, you can think about it as the age 30 transition. But I now see that that's a big thing for people, right? And it's something like, if you're lucky, you have this sort of recognition that, oh, I don't stay young forever. Around that age, it's sort of like, oh yeah, this is sort of the end of endless possibility kind of feeling. I mean, maybe not quite, but the first inkling of that. And, sort of like, oh, I guess I better kind of, oh, if there's something I want to do, maybe I better start doing it kind of feeling. So I think that it was triggered by the guy, but I think it was actually much, much deeper than that. And, so in some ways, though, it was, I would say the darkest things ever got for me was probably in that period. So did I feel like I wasn't going to find my way? No, probably not, because I had friends, I had family, I had parents who loved me, but it was a really, really dark time. And, yeah, and it was also transformational, as crises of meaning can be, because it was at the darkest moment. I know this sounds a little Hollywood, but I mean, not really. This is not really that interesting. But there was one day in particular when I sort of couldn't hold it at bay anymore. And I woke up and I sort of tried to do all of it's funny, I was just rereading my journal entries from this day, so this is very fresh in my mind. I was trying, it was March, and so like March in New York, it's like it was still snowy and cold, and just spring was maybe just beginning, but it was not, it wasn't a nice, the weather wasn't nice. And I tried to do all of the things, right? So I took my reading for graduate school to the cafe, and I had a cup of coffee at the cafe, and that didn't perk me up. I called all of my friends, and I was like, are you free today? Because I could feel myself slipping in a really dark place. Everyone was busy. There was, I was like alone. I forget what I was gonna do that day, but I knew I wasn't gonna be able to do it because I was just too depressed. And I don't know, I walked over to Broadway and, went to the Fairway there, let me buy some beautiful vegetables. It didn't work. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go running. I was a jogger. So going, and I was going jogging in Central Park. I mean, what's better than that? I couldn't do it. I just sat down on a bench and started weeping, It's like, oh, this is really bad. So there was a bookstore on Columbus Avenue. It was an independent bookstore, and throughout that year, I love bookstores. I love wandering into bookstores, right? So throughout that year, I would occasionally go to that bookstore just to browse, and I remember I was getting a master's degree in international affairs, but I would go down to the psychology section, or this like psychology self-help section, and look at the titles. And there was this one book called On the Way to the Wedding. And the title struck me because this I thought I was on the way to the wedding, but then I wasn't. So I picked the book up off the shelf and opened it to a random page and started reading and started to cry. And then I was like, I have 400 pages of reading to do for my international law class. I cannot buy this book. And I put it back on the shelf. So that had happened probably at least like 4 times throughout the preceding months. So this bad day in March, I went back to the bookstore, went back to the psychology self-help section. I saw that book again. I picked it up. I opened it to a random page. I started to cry. I put it back on the shelf. Then I was going back to my apartment, and I crossed Columbus Avenue, and there was a little new age gift shop called The Hero's Journey. I kid you not. And in this new age gift shop, they sold like incense and tarot cards and like those Native American dream catchers. And they sold like 7 books at the back of the shop. It wasn't a bookstore. On the Way to the Wedding was one of the books. So even though I hadn't read Jung at that time, like I knew, like, this is the universe telling me I have to buy this book. Like, this is just, this is too much. So I bought the book and I took it back to my apartment, and it was a signed copy.
No way.
Wow.
And the book was by Linda Leonard, who's a Jungian analyst. I didn't know, I mean, I knew who Jung was, which is another story that maybe we'll get to in a minute. but I wasn't interested in Jung. I'd never read Jung. That wasn't the draw, right? It was just the book. And as soon as I started reading that book, it was like soul balm, because she was describing the suffering that I was experiencing and giving me words for it and putting it in a meaningful context. And Linda's book takes fairy tales and films and clinical vignettes and personal stories and explores the meaning of looking for a love partner. Well, if you've read my book, that will sound very familiar, because that book was my model for motherhood. I mean, very openly, I was, what was it, like 20 years later that I was writing it more, I still, that pattern of a fairy tale and a story and a film, and here it is, and it's someone showing up in a famous person's life, a bit of biography. So that book just opened up a whole world for me, and it changed my relationship with my suffering. It didn't stop the suffering, but it changed the relationship with it. So Jung says, we don't solve our problems, we grow larger than them. And that book gave me a way to relate to my suffering in a larger way. And
that really brings us into kind of the direction that we want to go with you, which is actually about, how from the experiences from when we've fallen down and picked ourselves up, we develop a better way of dealing with those challenges, maybe a structure with which to think about those challenges that we didn't have. Like you said, when you were depressed, you didn't know it was a crisis of meaning. And I mean, in a way, you've kind of answered that question. That sort of finding Jung seems to have given you the narrative and the understanding of those questions. And I wonder if it's the Jungian, you then obviously found your way to become a Jungian analyst, but it also sounds like that's because you got an understanding that made those things bearable. Or you, maybe you learned, I guess the question might be, did you learn to grow into
something larger than your problem?
Yeah, those next challenges that came along. It got easier.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, I think, that is the key somehow, right? To have a framework for meaning, because, when suffering ceases to be suffering when it has meaning. And so when we can, when we have that framework for meaning, it makes us more resilient, let's say. And I mean, in a way, it's sort of like you guys asking me, when was your darkest hour? And I'm like, oh, this guy broke up with me when I was 28. I mean, I've had a pretty charmed life. I'm very aware of that. I've had sort of normal people problems, and not even that many of those.
Well, I mean, you'd be surprised how much heartbreak comes up as that formative thing. You just had a conversation where actually, there's something about heartbreak that breaks open someone for the opportunity for something to step in.
Oh, that's
if we're lucky. Sometimes it breaks apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wondered then, talking about the framework for meaning and changing the relationship to suffering, thinking about life lessons that you've learned until now, what's one perhaps that you feel that you've really come to grips with, that you've learned pretty well, that maybe you revisited a few times? And what's a life lesson that you feel still needs some work or care and attention?
I think the biggest, those sometimes say, what would you say to your 18-year-old self or whatever? And I always, it's a similar kind of thing.
We're going to come to that later. It's a classic and a good one.
Well, I think the life lesson for me is kind of similar to that. It's like, I look back at so many times when I didn't trust myself. I mean, that is a theme again and again and again and again. where I didn't trust myself. And it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, so at some point recently, just a few years ago, I found this journal from my freshman year of college, which I had been looking for, but I thought it was like, I thought it'd been taken to the, you know, dump at some point, but I found it. It was great. So I was rereading it, and it was so interesting to meet that person again. And it was very moving to meet that person again, who, was kind of suffering in a way and trying to figure some things out, and to see how kind of earnest I was, and to note that I was writing down my dreams. I had no idea I was writing down my dreams when I was 18 years old, but there I was writing down my dreams. And then, I read this thing that I had totally forgotten about, which is that my second semester freshman year, I took this upper level history seminar, and I wrote this paper on Petrarch, and I remember writing the paper. I remember loving writing the paper. What I did not remember is that the professor acknowledged my paper as maybe he even read it out loud or said, this was a great paper, and he acknowledged me in front of the class. So this was an upper level seminar, and I was a freshman. And, I'm sure it tickled me at the time. Of course it did. But what happened to me when I reread this a few years ago was, shit, right there was the evidence, right? Like I had, by the time I reread this, I had sold my book, and I was like, there it was.
Wow.
Like you were a really good writer, Lisa, back then when you were 19 years old. But I didn't let myself know that. But I had all the evidence I needed. I mean, it's not like that was the only data point, but that one in particular kind of was, kind of shocked me a little bit, But why didn't I say to myself, well, I know I can write a book. Why did it take me? I mean, I was in my 50s. I was in my 50s when I sold that book. Why couldn't I have had a little more? I mean, arguably I didn't have anything to say until then, which is really possible. But I also didn't
clearly
really
not, though,
believe
right?
it.
Because yeah, because you said in this very interview, right, that you're pushing your stroller down the cold New York street with these little babies and had something to say. That was what you said, 2002, right? Something like that.
2004.
Yeah.
2004. So
Yeah.
I wonder, like now, maybe with your framework, right? Like, how do you make sense of having had something to say as this 19-year-old young woman in college, having had something to say, pushing that pram down the street, living alongside whatever that not having to say? I mean, or what would you say? What is the other side? Maybe, what is the shadow side of that? Or the other side of the ambivalence, in your framework, what is that other side?
Well, I mean, I think that, thank God at some point I just said, no, listen, I've really got to do this, because I would have pangs of frustration that somehow I hadn't, I wouldn't have had the words for it. Okay. But that I felt like there was something I had to do, and that I hadn't managed to do it. And I hadn't managed to do it because I didn't believe in myself. And thank God I figured it out. It may have taken me until into my 50s, but better now than not doing it. Because I think that, having something to do and not doing it, that is a setup for being regretful, let's say, for having regrets. Yeah. And I suppose I do have some regrets, because I wonder what I could have done if I believed in myself earlier.
Yeah. I'm curious whether you had a contrary voice, as a lot of people do, right? Just in the normal conscious negative thoughts way, like, actually you don't have something to say. it doesn't feel like that's what you're saying. It's not like I have something to say, no, you don't, Lisa comes back. It feels like it's something a little bit more elusive that got in the way of you feeling you could do it, or start. Was it a matter of behavior? Was it a matter of starting to do it? And I'm just curious about what that obstacle was, because it seems like the voice is also so clear. Even the voice that says, "Okay, pick up and do it now." Almost like there's always a voice there.
So what was the inner voice that was what was the kind of originator of the doubt, or what was it that held me back? That's what you're asking?
Yeah. What is contrary to the voice that did know, that put it on pause? Yeah.
I mean, I think it was something like you're
that.
not. Yeah, I think it's something like you're like, yeah, Lisa, you're smart. You can write, but you're not that smart, and you can't write that well. Like, yeah, you're fine, but you're not that. It was very much like that. Like kind of, well, who do you think you are that you could do that? Like that is only for really special people. I think it was something like that.
Okay. So maybe even something about being
it was
allowed
like it
to
would
take
be
up
it's a very
space as an
audacious
authority.
Yeah. Yeah, that word authority always really that's an important word for me, I think, because I think that it's always like, oh, well, sometimes still in my life. Sometimes they're like, well, I think it's this, but someone else says no, and I really think it's that. And then I'll be like, oh, okay. But then later on it's like, no, I was right, So like trusting my own sense of authority. I mean, I think one of the things that many therapists have, that I definitely have, that makes me a good therapist, is I can just so easily enter someone else's stance. I can see things from their side. That is a good quality in many circumstances, but it makes it hard for me to stand where I'm standing and stay there.
I don't know if you describe it like this. There's something about, someone said this word to me the other day. I think of it in terms of permeability to someone else's reality or state or story. And this other person said it's about being porous, that if you're more porous towards people, I mean, I guess it sort of has the same ring, but when you talked earlier about being appreciated and called out for your early essay at age 19 in front of a class, and it struck me from what you said, and maybe I'm misreading this, that there was this kind of, my impression was that 19-year-old you sounded like she readily accepted that on some level, that there was a recognition of, hey, I love writing, this is great. Is that true, or am I just kind of projecting some fantasy that there was an ease of recognition of that quality, that didn't have to be egotistical, but it was just like yeah, I wrote this and I felt passionate about it and it's great and it's being recognized, and it feeling congruent somehow that it would be recognized.
Yeah, I don't think I would have said that at the time, but when I look back at it now, I mean, writing that paper was deeply pleasurable and meaningful. And then it, I mean, now I can say, like, yeah, look at that, you were good at it. We tend to like things that we're good at. You were good at it. Other people could see you were good at it. You liked it, But I couldn't, it didn't seem, I mean, in spite of the fact that I kind of went off to college and part of me is like, oh, I want to be a writer. I couldn't really claim that, because it seemed like that's not a job. Well, and it's actually not, but
yeah.
Nobody makes money writing.
Doesn't pay it,
but
I think all three of us know that one.
But I just couldn't get anywhere near it in terms of saying, like, yeah, this is what I want to do.
I'm probably going to want to come back to that, but I think we might have a lot of listeners, when we have our listeners who might be aspiring writers. I think that there is this thing about, going to the bookstore and seeing that spine of a book with an author on it, and it just feeling like this untouchable foreign object that only, writers do. There's something about the aura of that. But to link it back to this idea of progress and understanding frameworks and learning from our past. You started this interview by saying, I think February, this new book is going to come out, or you're finishing the book soon anyway. Could you say something about how your relationship to the new book was different to your relationship in the old one? The first one, rather?
So just repeat the last part of it, because the audio wasn't great. So just tell me again, what is it you want me to say? Something about the relationship between...
Has your approach... has your approach to the book that's coming out now, which, as I recall, might have something to do about taking space and taking authority, was your process in relation to that book very different from your relationship to the first book? And how?
So was the relationship with the second book really different from my relationship with the first book?
Yes.
Is that the question? Okay.
Yeah, and could you say something something about how that was different?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm thinking that. That's a really interesting question. I'm thinking it through. I want to say that I had lived with the ideas in the first book for so long, and I had written part of it as a thesis in analytic training. I mean, it had to be changed a lot, but I'd written a bunch about it. That by the time I came around to writing it as a complete document, it was such a cakewalk. And honestly, what the word interestingly that comes up for me is that I felt very comfortable and in a way very authoritative. Like I knew the voice I wanted it to have. I knew the cadence I wanted the language to have. I did feel like I had a sense of authority, like I knew what that book needed to be. And with the second book, I didn't have as much time to sit with it, so it kind of took shape. I mean, I basically had 12 months to turn in the manuscript, or like maybe even it was really more like 11 months. And the ideas weren't as worked over.
Sorry, the tech went a little bit wonky there, and I think we lost a little bit of that.
Okay.
Yes, let's take it from the top of the...
Yeah, sorry, you went... Yeah. Do you mind if I ask the question again, and we just...
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes what happens is...
I think also there's a lag time.
There's a delay. Yes. Yeah, there's definitely a delay. Usually because it uploads locally, like the actual video quality will be higher. But yeah, wherever you want to take it back from.
Okay. Should we change the video quality, or should we leave
where
it?
Do you want me to start?
I think we can, because it should be fine. It's just to get the question.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll just ask the question again, and we'll take it from there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So given what you've learned from your past and your relationship with that voice or those voices in that first book, could you say something about how it was different for you to approach the second book from the first?
Well, they were written under such different circumstances that I had so much time to write the first book and so much time to live with those ideas. And the second book was like I had 11 months. So I basically just had to start writing. Wow. So it was much more, the writing part of it was actually much more challenging with the second book. But it was also kind of fun because I knew it was going to get published. that made it a real romp. I enjoyed it.
What about from so that's kind of feels like a strategic thing in a way. You had a deadline, you had a publisher, but presumably you also had to query that publisher. That was a different Lisa, right, who made that query to sound true. I guess what I'm kind of asking is like, did you get over did you get over that thing that was really hard for you to get over to write the motherhood?
Yeah, no, I think I did. Yeah, I mean, I think that, listen, there was something that was really transformative for me about selling the book, writing the book, and the first book, and publishing the book. And I told you guys the story about the Linda Leonard book On the Way to the Wedding. What I didn't tell you about that story is that I think that unconsciously I recognized when I read that book that I wanted to. I think I found a sense of mission. And my sense of mission, although I would never have been able to say this at the time, was I wanted to be able to do what Linda Leonard did for me. And I think about it like I mean, I know this sounds crazy, but by the time I finished that book, I was like, oh my God, I wonder what it would be like to be a Jungian analyst. I mean, I was getting a master's in international affairs, but that was where the seed was planted. And then I also think that when I say do what Linda Leonard did, I think that sometimes I think my life mission, which I did not consciously pick, but which picked me, is to popularize Jung. So when my book was published and people started writing me things like, thank you so much, this book has changed my life. That was, I mean, there's nothing better. There's nothing better than feeling like I thought I had something to say that would help. And I did. I was right. So, Erin, you're sort of asking, did I get over it? It's like, well, yeah, I think I can, I think I can trust myself. I think if I feel like, I've got something to say and this might help people, I think I can take that to the bank now. I'm, 50 something years old. So, I mean, I didn't have quite as clear a sense of what I wanted to say initially in the second book, but I did know that I was mining a vein that would, well, I should say most of the time I knew I was mining a vein that would be helpful to people. And some of that too is, we talked about some of that stuff on the podcast and people wrote in and said, oh my God, this was amazing. And, I work with a lot of women. There's a lot of my client stories in the book too. And I can see that they're struggling with this. So I had data also, that these topics would be meaningful to people. But, ultimately it is a big, it is about trusting yourself because, it's not like I have a lot of data. I have a little data and a gut feeling that this would be helpful to people.
Interesting about the theme of trust, like someone else that we were interviewing was about creativity and showing up and how we choose to show up and how much is persona that we project to the world and what happens if you step into your life or into a kind of, let's say, the spotlight with more aspects of self in relationship to other people, so bringing more of yourself to the scene. And the question of trust came up then, in the sense of trust in the idea that if you take that leap, somehow you will find ground to step onto next. And so the trust sounds like maybe it's kind of relationship quality that's developed over time. But I wonder if there's a life lesson that you think still needs attention and work, where you could, maybe it's to do with the authority thing, maybe it's something else that you think, that would be quite nice to have a little bit more progress in that area. I have many of those. Like a library.
Yeah. So what am I, where am I still growing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, where am I still growing? Well, yeah, I mean, I do think the authority thing is still there for me. That's still something that I struggle with. There's definitely been times in the past few years where I have discovered that I had these big kind of gaping holes. And it's like, oh, I didn't know I had that big hole there. That's really interesting. I never things I, oh boy, I didn't think that was going to happen, and it did. Didn't I thought I was above that. So, I mean, one of the things that I kind of love about being a therapist or an analyst is that you never get really good at it. You always fuck up, if I can say that. And I've,
Yes, you
I've
can.
screwed up a few times in in the past several years. And, I got caught in something unconscious and, didn't handle situations very well. I mean, it happens all the time, right? And I can look at that and feel some dismay still, that still happens. But then I know that in a way it means I'm human. That there's
Mm.
more of me to know, that there was something I didn't know about myself that landed me in that position. And how wonderful that there will always be more of me that I don't know. So when I make a mistake like that, it's like, well, there's another aspect of myself I didn't know about before. I
What was
think
that quote
also
you
just
said
being
before
sort
about
of that confrontation thing. That's, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Ah, yes.
right, about getting bigger? The Jung quote about growing in. I've lost it now. Right,
About sort of discovering parts of myself I didn't know about before.
Growing bigger than your problems.
Growing bigger than your problems. Yeah, growing bigger. The capacity to grow bigger than your problems, like that. It reframes something as being bad at or a problem or a mistake. I mean, we still make mistakes, but the capacity to be bigger than them and use them, to move through. I want to make sure that we talk about the
take.
Sorry, with the lag time.
Yeah, the lag time is terrible, but yeah, please respond.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that viewing things like that through that lens, like, oh, this is a mistake, and I made a mistake, and I didn't know something about myself, and this is an opportunity to know more and learn more and grow bigger than my problems, or whatever. It is. I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculously Pollyanna or something, but I really do take it on board that way, and it allows me to be forgiving of myself. I mean, not like it doesn't feel horrible to make a mistake, and I don't engage in some degree of self-flagellation, but there is this place I can really find. It's like, okay, well, I'm human. I didn't know that about myself. Now I know a whole bunch more that I didn't know before, and I can find some forgiveness for myself, and I think that that's actually a really great thing to model for other people. So I think I've been able to help people in my practice who were really badly self-flagellating. It's like, well, wait a minute, what about this? Did you think about it this way? It's like, oh yeah, I guess I could, just you made a mistake. Welcome to the human race. It's like, isn't that lovely to know that you're human? So,
thank you. We're kind of moving towards the sort of closing side of the interview, but I wanted to make sure we talked about this Jungian life a little bit, because that was very much what attracted Natalie and I to speaking to you. And you said there've been a couple of resonances that I've heard, right? Like that you knew that you didn't want to publish the first book to a niche Jungian audience, that you wanted mothers to read it, right? And same with the site. I wanted to popularize Jung, you said, and you've got this great podcast. And I know, working in a very similar field to you, that it's not always a straightforward process of popularizing, getting ideas out there from things that are very nuanced, very much, and there can be a lot of judgment about it. There can be it's difficult to get those ideas across. It's difficult to get the public to understand that they might be interested in that in the first place, right? It's like depth psychology is kind of hard to sell. I've found anyway sometimes. But I just wonder if just briefly you could tell us something about how that came to be. I know it's a big question because it's a lot of what you do, but sort of, you and your colleagues have manifested a really great space where people can learn about these ideas and they don't have to be specialists.
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, I really thank you for that sort of introduction to it. Like I said before, I'm just not, I'm just not one of these really brilliant people who's going to like write new kind of groundbreaking theoretical papers. I'm so glad those people exist, and I love reading their papers, but that is just not the way my brain works. And so I do think that I am, as I do think I'm a popularizer, and the people that I really admire are popularizers, because I mean, that was one of the things when I read Linda Leonard or James Hollis or Clarissa Pinkola Estes. You read their books and you're like, wow, they are taking really nuanced, deep ideas and making them accessible. And to me, that is a wonderful service and an art form. And the thing is, it's like a pleasure to read, and combining these beautiful ideas with a pleasurable reading experience. It's like, it's like a warm bath at the end of the day. So, we really did. We started the podcast. I had been on someone's podcast, and I found myself thinking, I wonder what it's like to, have a podcast. It just kind of got me curious, and I found myself sort of trying it out. Would I want to do that? That maybe that would be fun. Sort of, that was the feeling. It's like, would that be a fun project? And I knew I didn't want to do it alone, because it was for fun. And so I thought about doing it with Deb and Joseph, and I asked them, and if they had said, no, not really, I don't really have the energy for that, it would have gone nowhere. But they were like, yeah, let's do it. Mm-hmm. So it really was like, God, I can't even remember that movie. It's a super old movie with a really young Mickey Rooney and a really young Judy Garland. And they say, hey, kids, let's put on a show. Do you know that movie? It's like it's like a million years old. Anyway, so it's kind of like that. It's like, hey, yeah, let's put on a podcast. So we explicitly did it for fun. We did take some time and think about what we wanted to get out of it. I mean, I think we knew that we were just going to be trying to talk to the general public about Jung's ideas in a kind of engaging way, kind of very conversational. And we said, let's do it for a year and see what happens. And, then we'll either stop or we'll keep going. And that was 2018, and we're still going, and we've hit 10 million downloads. And
oh my gosh, congratulations.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I'm probably about one of those millions. But it's interesting because you get, or at least I certainly feel like, in the intro you talk about this on This Jungian Life, that it's three good friends, and it really permeates the quality and texture of the conversation, that there's this kind of shared joy of exploration, especially, and even in the really thorny, emotionally complicated subjects, which are some of my favorite episodes. It's this kind of richness that's shot through with intimacy and joy and shared play somehow, which is it's just a really wonderful space to step into. It feels very alive. So yeah, I want to say thank you, because it's just a joyful world for me.
Yeah, and there's so much. I mean, there's so much content. There's so much bad psychology, across the internet and across social media, that it is a service too. And it's lovely that you can play and enjoy it, have it be intimate, and have it be real. So I think that's a real accomplishment. Gift. Yeah. Should we move into our
Yes. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's right. What are we moving into?
Okay. Would you like to explain our quickfire close?
Sure. So we have what we have colloquially called a quickfire close, but so far it's not been that quickfire. So let's see how we get on. One thing I'd like to ask is, given that we've kind of covered vignettes of your story, how are you feeling about the conversation today? Is there anything that's really stood out to you in terms of your recollections or a particular theme?
Well, I guess it feels, in some ways remarkably coherent, this theme of sort of, trust yourself and all these different points along the road. And, I told you I was rereading old journals recently for a different project. And there I was, 28 or something. And I wrote something like, I really want to learn to step into my authority more. And it's like, oh my God, that's what this book is about that I just wrote. And there I was, 28-year-old saying it. So yeah, I guess the themes that come up, they're pretty consistent, aren't they? Which is in some ways kind of boring, but in other ways kind of reassuring.
And quite narcissistically, having met us for just under 90 minutes or something, did you learn anything new about yourself in this interview?
Yes, I mean, I think that it's again just how the pieces fit together, all the way back to, you know, the early story. You asked me, you know, what's an important experience, and that it dislodged this memory of this conversation I had with my mother, and it just kind of it's all of a piece.
And so circling back to your question, which foreshadowed this question around the 18-year-old self, we want to go back 8 years further and ask if you could go back and say something to 10-year-old Lisa, what might you say to her?
Boy, 10, that was not easy. That wasn't easy. I was like one of those kids that got bullied and stuff. And, you know, I think I'd just say, you know, don't listen, you know, don't listen to them. You're okay. You're going to be good. You just got to wait a little while. It's all going to come out in your favor.
And conversely, Lisa, what do you think your hard beaten at that stage 10-year-old self might say to you if she were able to meet you right now and know who you've become?
If that person saw me now and what she would say, or I think she'd be amazed.
Wow.
Yeah.
I got a little chill.
I got a little bit teary.
That's really lovely to hear.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like this conversation has been replete with gems and advice in some form or another. But for folks who are listening to this, who might be at points of transition themselves or wanting to make a change or step into a different kind of life path, what piece of advice might you offer them?
You know, something about just saying yes. I think that is a strength of mine that I have always, I mean, just say yes to the adventure. I mean, obviously you can't be foolish. You have to have, you know, sort of Freud's confrontation with reality. But whether it was the podcast, I mean, it's not like I said, oh, I'm going to do this podcast and we're going to get this. And then that's going to, there wasn't like a plan. It just was the universe kind of offered it or whatever, you know, and it was like, well, yes, let's do it. You know, let's do this. So I have always been a kind of a person who said yes. And that can be an exhausting way to live. But, as my family
you're advising
will tell
it
you.
Nonetheless.
Well, I think I do. It's sort of an embrace, and you know, embrace life, I guess. I do.
Yeah. I think what's come up a lot.
I'll say this because I watch people, right? We all have clients and we see how they live. People who have that sense of embracing life and sort of saying yes in general, right? Generally have better outcomes than people who hold back.
So say yes. Okay. Lisa, is there a question you wish we'd asked you and didn't? Or is there something that you'd like to share that you didn't get the opportunity to?
Let me just think about that for a second. Maybe just I don't know, this is sort of apropos of nothing, but I think you kind of made me think about it, Erin, when you talked about how much bad psychology there is around on the internet. I did not have any idea when we started the podcast that we were going to be speaking into a certain cultural phenomenon, in terms of kind of mental health on the internet. You know, I didn't, I was like, oh, we're going to be an antidote to the Instagram therapists. No, I wasn't thinking that. But somehow we were, I don't want to say in the right place at the right time, right? But this kind of crazy idea that we had to put on a podcast rose up in this time when I think people really are hungry for depth, which is, people used to say, oh, how did you get so big so fast? And I was like, you know, what advertising strategy did you use? I'm like, we didn't do anything. I think, and I still think this, I think the reason that people like the podcast is that people are hungry for meaning. And I think it's, you know, I think people like the podcast because of Jung's ideas. It's not really so much us. It's really the ideas that people are listening for. And so maybe that's, you know, again, just sort of the sense of being mission driven, or maybe that when you say yes, you find that thing that you were supposed to do. Maybe that's it.
That's really nicely put. I do want to say, before Natalie asks her question, I just do want to say, please don't diminish the delivery, because yes, Jung has great ideas, and the three of you deliver it in such a way, right? So I mean, it matters, and it's
all right.
It is.
I'll take that. Thank you.
So
yeah, I mean, there are not all Jungian podcasts are created equal.
No.
I have listened to a fair few.
Okay.
And there's a lot to it. Yeah. So you've told us about your very exciting forthcoming book coming out in February. I think it'd be lovely if you can remind us again the name, and also where our listeners can find you and learn more about your work, about the podcast, and anything else that you'd like to highlight for them.
Sure. So the book is called The Vital Spark: Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire. And the release date is February 6th. It is available for pre-order already. And my website is lisamarchiano.com, and the This Jungian Life is thisjungianlife.com. And you can find me in both places.
Woohoo. Amazing. Well, I think that was it.
Thank you for taking the time to show up with us. That was a really, really interesting interview. I'm really excited about this book coming out. I love the title.
Me too. I'm going to be buying multiple copies for my female
That's
friends.
Very kind. That's very kind.
And thanks for sharing your time with us today. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me to take this deep dive.